We've looked at how to create custom functions and call those functions from within another body of code with a calling statement. But sometimes we want to pass a value to that function, let it perform a calculation on that value, and return a result back to the calling statement. And that's what we're going to look at in this lesson. So I've got a button listener event that's going to call a function called calculate. And calculate creates a variable called xyz, which is of a number data type, places a value of 4 into it. Let's suppose that we have a need for a procedure that squares a number and subtracts the value of the number from that result. So it's the square minus the value. And I might want to do that over and over again for different things. So I'm going to put that into a function. So I've created a function here called square less value. So in my output text box, I'm going to place in the text the value of square less value, the result of that. I'm going to convert that to a string. So I'm calling my function square less value, and inside the parentheses I'm placing an argument which is my variable xyz. In my function definition, I have the name of my function, square less value, and then inside parentheses I have a parameter. And the parameter in this case is called ABC. And what's going to happen is the value of xyz, which is 4, gets placed in the value of my variable ABC. So 4 now becomes ABC, and one critical thing here is the data type of this parameter must be the same as the data type of the argument that's being passed. xyz is a number. This must be a number. And then after the colon, we've had void in the past because we didn't return anything. Now we're going to return a number value, and so my data type for return is also data type number. So when this function gets called, I'm going to pass 4 into ABC, and then I've got a variable called myValue, which is also data type number, and it's going to equal, to get the square, I'm going to multiply it by itself, ABC times ABC, and then I'll subtract the value of ABC. So in this case, it'd be 4 times 4 is 16, minus 4 would be 12. And then in a function that returns a value, I must have a return statement. And here I'm going to return the value of my value. So I'm going to return, in this case, 12. So the value of 12 replaces, in essence, this square less value xyz. 12 is converted to a string and is placed in the text box named output underscore txt. We might want to pass more than one value, and we can pass as many values as we like. So in this example, I've got two variables, xyz and abc. They equal 4 and 7 respectively. And the function that I'm calling here is called product, and I'm passing it the value of xyz and the value of abc. So my function, I've got the name of my function product, and my parameters here are a is a number and b is a number. Both of these were numbers. These both need to be numbers. And if I have 2 arguments here, I must have 2 arguments here, or 2 parameters here. If I have 2 arguments here and 3 parameters, I'm going to get an error. And same if I have 3 arguments and 2 parameters, I'm going to get an error. So the number of values being passed must match up with the calling statement. I'm also returning a type number here. So xyz goes into A would become 4. ABC goes into B would become 7. I have a variable n here, which is also a number data type. It equals A times B. So 4 times 7 is the value of n, and this should be, instead of my value, this should be an n here. So I'm going to return n. The value of n, which is going to be 28, will go into or replace this product xyz abc. That's the result. I'm going to use .toString, convert that to a string. And so the string of 28 goes into the text property of output underscore txt. So the key here is my arguments and my parameters must be separated by commas. The data types must match, and the number of arguments and parameters must match. And I must return a value that is consistent with the data type that is specified at the end of my function declaration. Let's use this in a project. So very simply here, I have a input box that is named length underscore txt, and an input box is named height underscore txt. The user would enter 2 values and click this button named calc underscore btn. And calc underscore btn should place in my dynamic text box here named area underscore txt, the length times the height. So in essence, the area of a rectangle is what we're finding here. Let's look at our code. So here's my event listener. The function that's calling is calc area. I've got two variables, L and H. I'm putting the length input into L and the height input from those text boxes into H. And then my area underscore txt output dynamic text box is going to get the area L times H. So I'm calling another custom function, passing it two values, L and H, which are both numbers. Here is my function. And my function, I used len number and HEI number. By the way, I could have made these the same. They don't have to be. So I could use L and H here. I could use X and Y. Actually, X and Y are key words or key properties. But I might have used A and B. So since I changed those, let me change these to L and H as well. So these are not the same L and H here that are up here, just to be aware of that. I've got a variable called area, which is equal length times height, or L times H. I'm going to return area. So if I test this, click my calculate button, I get 120 there. That's what I expected. Now my function is passing two numbers, and it's getting a number back. And then I'm converting that number to a string. I may want to instead return the calculation already as a string. So I'm going to comment out this line of code and uncomment the next code, which is basically the same thing, but it's calling another function called getAreaString and passing it L and H. That's this function down here. And notice that L is going to go into len, H is going to go into HEI. My variable area is being calculated as len times HEI. And then when I'm returning area dot toString. Instead of returning a number, I'm returning the number converted to a string. And notice that my data type here is string. That removes the need to convert this to a string before I put it into the text property of area underscore txt. Two different ways of solving the same problem. Very similar in concept, just the return value is different. Let me test, make sure that this works. And it does. So here's another project called Reverse Me. I've got an input text box. I've got a button called reverse underscore btn. And I've got a dynamic text box called output underscore txt. Let me just test the movie so you can see what's going to happen here. I'm going to take the text that's in the input text box, click reverse, and have it written backwards in the dynamic text box. Let's look at our code. So my reverse button is calling this function reverse input. I'm calling reverse me, which is a user function or a custom function, and I'm passing it the text property that is in the input underscore txt input text box. So reverse me calls the function here reverse me. My input text is going into a string called xyz. It's going to return a string back. So I need to convert my result into a string before I put it in the output text box. And then I have a couple variables, I and j. J is going to equal the length of whatever string I'm passing it. So how many characters are in South Mountain in this case. I've got another string variable called newString, which equals nothing or a null string. And then I've got a for loop that goes from the last character of the string to the first character of the string, character 0, and I'm decrementing it by 1 each time through the loop. And each time through the loop, I'm concatenating a new string, that character of position I, using the substring method of our string class. That places or creates a new string that is the text written backwards, and that's what I return. So I'm returning new string. New string then is placed in my output text box. And then here's another project. I created an analog clock. Let me just run this. So an analog clock that's also showing the digital time below it, and it's updated every second. And this is a self-contained movie clip, so I could take this object or this movie clip and paste it into another project, and I can use it without having to do any more code. The only thing I would need to do is make sure that I embed the font of this text box back here. So let's take a look at this. This is just a movie clip. I'm going to burrow down into it. So I've gone from scene 1 into the movie clip, and I have basically a layer for the hour hand, the second hand, and the minute hand. And those are movie clips in and of themselves that, in the case of the minute hand, is going from 1 to 60. Same with the hour hand, same with the second hand. My actions are, I've got a function called setClock that is occurring every time I hit the first frame. It's 5 frames long, so it's looping every 5 frames. So if I'm running at 24 frames per second, it's actually going to execute this about 5 times every second, but it's only going to update it one of those times. It's only going to update it when the second has changed. But what I'm doing here is I'm getting the current date from the system clock, and I'm converting that into the number of hours, minutes, and seconds. Now those are integers. The hours, I'm doing a modulus operation by 12, which is going to convert it from a 24-hour clock to a 12-hour clock. And then I'm going to move the hour hand, the minute hand, the second hand to whatever frame represents that number, where the hand should be on those values. And then I have this string variable, digital, and I wanted to place the hours, minutes, and seconds. The problem I was having when I first created this was I was using H, M, and S, but M, if it was less than 10, was a single digit. I needed to show a leading 0 if the hour or the minute or the second was less than 10. So I created a function called double digits. And the first time here I'm passing it H, and all I'm looking at, H is going into N. If N is less than 10, I'm going to put a 0 in front of H, or in this case in front of N, and return that. Otherwise, I'm just going to return N back. I call it again for the minutes, and I call it a third time for the seconds. So right now it's about 3:05. Let me change this slightly so you can see what happens if I didn't call this function. So all I'm going to do is have it display H, M, and S. I'll comment out this line here. So let me test my movie. And you can see the problem I was having. It's 3:06, 6 after 3, 48 seconds, 49 seconds. But I'm missing that leading 0 here, and especially the leading 0 here. So now if I uncomment out the line where I'm calling my user function, comment out that line and test again, now I'm getting it in the proper format. So I'm calling this function 3 times, but I only had to write it once. Otherwise, I would have had to convert H into this format up here, M into this format, and S in this format. And it would have added at least an extra 6 or 7 lines for each one of those. And I may want to use this function again in another project. I can simply copy and paste. I could have also assigned another programmer to work on developing this. They could have came back with it, just plug it in, and it's ready to use.